"81st Street. Step out, folks," shouted the conductor in his blue uniform. A crowd of passengers hurried off the train while another group climbed on. Ding ding. The Manhattan elevated train clattered away, and John Perkins followed the exiting crowd down the station stairs. John walked slowly toward his apartment. He wasn't in any rush. His life was as predictable as clockwork. After 2 years of marriage and living in the same small apartment, surprises weren't part of his routine anymore. As he walked, he thought with a mix of sarcasm and resignation about how the rest of his day would play out. Katie, his wife, would greet him at the door with a kiss, sweet but with a hint of cold cream and butterscotch from her snack. He'd hang up his coat, sink into their lumpy couch, and read the evening paper filled with grim headlines about the war between Russia and Japan. Dinner would be the same as usual: pot roasts, a salad with dressing so thick it might as well be leather polish, some stewed rhubarb, and a jar of overly perfect strawberry jam with a 100% pure label on it. After dinner, Katie would proudly show him a patch she added to her quilt, made from a scrap of fabric the Iceman had kindly given her. By 7:30, they'd lay newspapers over the furniture to catch bits of plaster falling from the ceiling. Thanks to their upstairs neighbor doing his nightly exercise routine. At exactly 8, the amateur comedy duo in the apartment across the hall would kick off their nightly chaos, knocking over chairs as they pretended to land imaginary entertainment contracts. Not long after, the neighbor across the air shaft would start playing his flute. The faint smell of a gas leak would drift through the building. The dumbwaiter would break again, and the janitor would scold the Zanowitzki kids for being too loud. The woman with the tiny dog and fancy shoes would come down to change the name on her mailbox. Again. And just like that, another ordinary evening in the Frogmore Flats would be underway. John knew all of this was inevitable. He also knew that around 8:15 he'd grab his hat and try to sneak out. And every time, Katie would stop him, asking in a sharp tone, "Where do you think you're going, John Perkins?" "I'm just heading to McCloskey's to play a little pool with the guys," he'd reply. This had become his escape lately. He'd stay out until 10 or 11, then come home. Sometimes Katie would be asleep, but other times she'd be awake and annoyed, ready to vent her frustrations about their routine marriage. It wasn't the most exciting life, but it was theirs. But tonight, when John got home, something was different. So different it shook him. Katie wasn't there to greet him at the door. The apartment was a mess, which was unlike her. Shoes were scattered on the floor. Her hair accessories, curling iron, powder box, and clothes were left lying around, completely out of place. John's heart sank when he saw her hair comb still holding strands of her brown hair. She always collected those strands in a little blue vase to make a hairpiece someday. Then he noticed a piece of paper dangling from the gaslight, tied with string. He grabbed it and unfolded it. It was a note from Katie. "Dear John, I just got a telegram saying my mother is very sick. I'm taking the 4:30 train, and Sam will meet me at the station. There's cold mutton in the fridge. I hope it's not her quinsy again. Pay the milkman 50 cents. She had it bad last spring. Don't forget to write to the gas company about the meter. Your good socks are in the top drawer. I'll write tomorrow. Katie." In 2 years of marriage, John and Katie had never spent a single night apart. He read the note over and over, stunned. His carefully predictable routine had suddenly been thrown out of balance, and he didn't know what to do. Her red housecoat, the one she always wore while cooking, was draped over a chair, looking lifeless without her in it. Her weekday clothes were tossed around in her rush to pack. A small bag of her favorite butterscotch candies sat unopened. On the floor was their newspaper, with a hole where she'd cut out a train schedule. The whole apartment felt empty, like it had lost its spirit. John stood there, surrounded by the mess, with a strange, heavy feeling of loneliness settling over him. John started tidying up the apartment as best as he could. When he picked up Katie's clothes, a wave of uneasiness hit him. He had never really thought about what life would be like without her. She was so much a part of his life, like the air he breathed. Always there, but something he didn't usually think about. And now, suddenly, she was gone. Sure, it was only for a few days, maybe a week, but it felt like a piece of his life had been ripped away. John pulled the cold mutton out of the fridge, made some coffee, and sat down to eat by himself. Across from him, the strawberry marmalade jar, with its smug, pure, and wholesome label, seemed to mock him. He found himself missing the meals he had once complained about. Pot roasts and that salad with the weird dressing that tasted like shoe polish. His home felt empty and broken, all because Katie's mom had a health scare. After dinner, John sat by the front window, staring out at the bustling city. He could feel the energy of the streets, calling him to come out and have some fun. The night was his. He could do whatever he wanted. Stay out late, roam the city, play pool until sunrise. For once, there would be no Katie waiting up for him, upset and ready to remind him of his responsibilities. He was free to enjoy himself, no strings attached. Katie was gone, and so were the rules. But instead of feeling excited, John felt off. He wasn't used to digging deep into his feelings, but as he sat alone in their little living room, he realized the truth. He needed Katie. Her absence had stirred something in him that he hadn't noticed before. All the sayings he'd heard about not appreciating what you have until it's gone suddenly felt painfully real. I'm such an idiot, John thought. I've been out almost every night, leaving Katie here alone, bored with nothing to do. And for what? Pool games and hanging out with the guys? She deserves better. I've been the worst husband ever. That's it. I'm going to make this up to her. No more McCloskeys. I'll take her out, show her a good time, and be the husband she deserves. The city was still alive and calling him outside. McCloskey's was waiting. The guys probably already messing around with the pool table. But John wasn't interested anymore. He missed Katie. The very thing he'd taken for granted was now all he wanted. Nearby, a chair caught his eye. Katie's blue shirt was draped over it, still holding the shape of her body, the little wrinkles in the sleeves showing where her arms had moved as she worked to make his life better. A faint scent of her perfume lingered on it. Bluebells. John picked it up and just stared at it, overwhelmed. Tears welled up in his eyes. He promised himself that when she came back, things would be different. He'd be better. He couldn't imagine life without her. Suddenly, the door opened, and there she was, Katie, holding her little travel bag. John just stared at her, completely stunned. "Oh, I'm so glad to be back," Katie said, setting her bag down. "Mom wasn't that sick after all. Sam met me at the station and said she just had a small spell, but felt better right after they sent the telegram. So I caught the next train home. I'm dying for a cup of coffee." Without anyone noticing, the world in their apartment clicked back into its normal rhythm. The Frogmore Flats hummed with its usual routines, like a machine shifting back into gear. John glanced at the clock. It was 8:15. He grabbed his hat and headed toward the door. "And where do you think you're going, John Perkins?" Katie asked, her voice sharp and familiar. "Thought I'd drop by McCloskey's," John said. "Play a game or two of pool with the guys."